Two new developments to report tonight in the scandal unfolding around Donald Trump cabinet official, U.S. Labor Secretary Alex Acosta. Alex Acosta is Labor Secretary now. He was previously the U.S. Attorney in Florida when a hedge fund millionaire named Jeffrey Epstein was investigated by the FBI for myriad child sex crimes. Instead of bringing charges as a result of that investigation, the U.S. attorney in that jurisdiction, again, now our sitting Labor Secretary, Alex Acosta, he gave Jeffrey Epstein a deal, which gave him immunity from all federal charges. Instead, Acosta let Epstein plead guilty to just 2 state prostitution charges. Since then, news organizations led by the Miami Herald have been battling in federal court trying to get records unsealed in a defamation case related to the case against Epstein. The thinking is that those records might shed light on the lenient plea deal that was brokered by Alex Acosta. It might also shed further light on Epstein's crimes and any of his potential accomplices. The court set a deadline for yesterday for anybody to come forward with a justification for why records in that case should stay sealed. Otherwise, the judges said they were inclined to release those records to the public after all these years. But look at what happened right before the deadline. Quote, 2 mystery parties tried to restrict release of documents in Jeffrey Epstein's civil suit. This happened right at the deadline. One of the mystery people who came forward right at the deadline is reportedly an Epstein victim who wants to keep information about herself out of any released documents. The other is an unidentified man calling himself John Doe. And those 2 mystery parties at the very last minute are trying to block the unsealing of these court records about the Epstein case. In the case of the victim, it's easy to see why she might want her own self-defined privacy in this matter. For the John Doe, though, who knows what his interests are here? The fight over keeping those records under seal or releasing them is coming to a head right now. And it's all happening in the context of another brand new revelation on this case from the Miami Herald. Unbeknownst to everybody at the time, when Jeffrey Epstein cut that deal with Alex Acosta so he could plead guilty to just 2 state charges, the youngest victim involved in the crimes they let Epstein plead to was 16 years old, which is horrifying in itself. But they let him plead to a case involving a 16-year-old, despite the fact that other victims as young as 13 and 14 had come forward. And that's not only new information in terms of understanding the deal that Alex Acosta brokered for Jeffrey Epstein, it also sheds light on just how much of a sweetheart deal Alex Acosta gave Jeffrey Epstein. Because 16 is the age of consent in more than half the country. So allowing Epstein to plead guilty to charges with a 16-year-old girl, with an older victim instead of the 13 and 14-year-olds who came forward, that eased his obligations to register as a child sex offender. Why would you go out of your way to do that when making this deal with him, when you had younger victims who had come forward? Joining us now is Julie Brown. She's an investigative reporter at the Miami Herald who has done landmark reporting on the Epstein case and everything that Labor Secretary Alex Acosta did for Epstein in this case. Ms. Brown, thank you very much for joining us. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Let me ask you first about this new reporting that is just posted at the Herald tonight about the 16-year-old girl whose allegation against Epstein was the basis of his plea deal. This is the headline in your scoop tonight. Quote, she was the victim in Epstein's secret plea deal. She didn't even know it. Can you explain that headline and what you found here?
Well, for unknown reasons, all of a sudden the state attorney in Palm Beach announced the birth date of the girl that was attached to the plea deal that Mr. Epstein agreed to plead to at the time that he was a suspect in a number of child sex trafficking crimes. Instead of charging him with federal sex trafficking crimes, he was allowed to plead guilty to prostitution charges. The paperwork for that was always very vague. It wasn't clear exactly which victim that was attached to. There was no paperwork on it, and they didn't present it even to the sentencing judge. And now we know that this particular victim was 16 years old, and the reason why they picked a 16-year-old was, again, not only did they manipulate the criminal case against him, sabotage the criminal case against him, but they also manipulated the charge that he had to plead to, which involves a registered sex offense. And by doing that, he doesn't have as strict monitoring and registration requirements.
In terms of what happened here with these victims, I mean, it's striking that you have found that this woman who was the described victim essentially in the secret plea deal didn't even know that hers was the case that he pled to. I mean, one of the things that's striking is that it appears that in court, the judge asked about other victims, and the judge asked the prosecutors whether or not the victims were essentially okay with this deal, whether they were aware that it had happened. Prosecutors appear to have misrepresented the truth to the judge and told the judge that the victims all knew about this. And also, they seem to have kept from the judge the total number of victims involved here. That suggests to me that the prosecutors may be in even further trouble than we've already seen as this case has broken open this year, in large part because of your reporting.
Well, we knew from the paperwork we already had that they were trying to mislead the judge. There were communications between the lead federal prosecutor and Epstein's attorneys, basically where they were saying, we really don't want to tell the judge how many victims there are or how many charges that we could have gotten them on. Let's just not tell the judge all this information. But this really, the significance of this latest story, now that we know who the victim was in this particular plea, it's clear because the attorney for that woman, I spoke with him yesterday, and he said he represented 16, by the way, of Epstein's underage victims.
Wow.
And he said none of his victims were ever informed of this plea deal. So when the prosecutor went in front of the judge and the judge said, have these victims been notified? And she said yes, it's clear that that was untrue.
Julie Brown, investigative reporter for the Miami Herald, who, among other things, has won a Polk Award for this reporting. Julie, thank you for updating us tonight. Really appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks.
Again, it remains, I mean, we have seen a lot of scandal. We have seen a lot of departures in scandal from the Trump administration and even from the Trump cabinet. It remains astonishing to me that in this case, with Alex Acosta as labor secretary, literally a federal judge has ruled that he broke the law when leading that prosecutor's office into doing this deal with Epstein, that the law was broken by Acosta in his last federal job before the one he's in now, and yet he remains as a cabinet secretary. He remains as labor secretary in this administration. The president, as recently as this week, voicing full support for him, despite him breaking the law in order to give a child sex offender a sweet deal that his victims were never allowed to know about. I'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.